You made this decision long ago. The Empire cannot win.
Andor Season 2 is the best Star Wars has been since 1983. I know that's a bold statement, and saying that this is the best Star Wars has been in 42 years absolutely requires some further explanation. Andor Season 2 has stirred up quite the controversy these past 2 months. While most see it as an absolute triumph for Star Wars and a return to form which has become ever so sporadic since Disney took over, there are a lot of criticisms being laid against it which I think are shallow and not well thought out. Whether it's controversial scenes that shape people's opinions of the whole show, whether it's the darker tone, which admittedly is much darker and grittier than Star Wars is generally accustomed to depicting, or whether it's the slower burning nature of Andor that turns people off, with a lack of more typical Star Wars-y action, and instead opting to take the time to really build a set of characters which will stand the test of time and gets people intimately and emotionally invested. But this is exactly what Andor sets out to do, and that's why I love it so much. I think a lot of these criticisms stem from the fact that Andor is the only really good thing that Star Wars under Disney has made. And I think some people are upset that Andor of all things is what's gotten the best writing and most care put into it. Andor is perhaps the least Star Wars-y thing on Disney Plus, and it's by far the best, and I think that upsets people. And I understand, yeah, I wish that Kenobi could have been great. I wish that Boba Fett could have been great. Hell, I even wish the Acolyte could have been great. But they weren't. They were shit. And I'm going to take great when I get it, regardless of how Star Wars-y it feels. The standards for what exactly Star Wars is and what makes Star Wars good has warped people's minds so much as to people thinking that this, or this, or this is good. It reminds people of the thing they actually like, and therefore subconsciously, they think that it's good, regardless if the story is shit or not. This is exactly what happened with The Force Awakens. I remember The Force Awakens coming out in theaters when I was 12 years old. I loved Star Wars growing up as a kid, so the fact that I got to see the new Star Wars movie in theaters was beyond exciting. The older generation was likewise just as hyped to see Star Wars return to the big screen, and The Force Awakens delivered exactly what you thought you wanted. It was a copy and paste of Episode 4. But once you made your way through the frosting at the top of the cake, instead of finding cake underneath, instead you found literal shit. Force Awakens was really loved right when it came out, but the more time went on and people started to think more critically about it, they realized, oh wait, that actually was terrible. I think people are a little more accustomed to this now since Lucasfilm does this all the time, but still, there are people that are falling for these shows thinking they are good. So when you see something like Andor, something that stands completely on its own, has next to no prior connections to anything that came before besides a couple of characters, these people are naturally going to be turned off by that because they can't associate it with anything Star Wars they like. And a lot of people aren't giving a fair shake of the hand because of that very thing. But I wish they would. Andor is so ahead of everything else that has come on Disney Plus that I struggle to even grasp the idea that this is even the same universe. The same company that produced this also produced this. It just goes to show what can happen when you put Star Wars into the hands of the right people. True artists that not only respect the material that came before, but also have something to say, a story to tell, which all culminates into something that positively expands upon the universe that George Lucas created, and thoroughly justifies its existence. The emotional payoffs of this show are fantastic, and thoroughly earned by the setups and build-ups laid throughout. The character writing is emotionally mature, well thought out, and extremely engaging. The world building is phenomenal. Not only are the sets and costumes far superior to everything the other shows have given us, but the actual worlds themselves, the peoples within them, the cultures within them, are so thoroughly realized and intimately explored that I actually care what happens to them. The show takes the time to get attached and or emotionally invested in the places and peoples that surround the main characters. All of this goes to say that Andor gets everything right when it comes to the macro details of what makes a show truly special, and I can't wait to dive deep into the episodes. Today, in part 1, I'm going to be taking a look at episode 1. But before I get into the meat and potatoes of the first episode, there are a few things that I think are worth mentioning so you can understand my general mindset about the first group of episodes before going into it. So, to get the obvious out of the way, yes, I do think that the first 3 episodes are the weakest of the group of 4. That's not exactly a hot take. That's a pretty commonly shared opinion throughout the internet. However, I don't think that these episodes are as all bad as many people are making them out to be. It's very easy to paint these episodes with a broad brush and say that they are all bad because they are the weakest of the season. But I think that's a disservice to some of the great moments and very needed groundwork that the first 3 episodes lay out. Not only do they do a great job of establishing the current power dynamics present throughout the galaxy at this moment in the timeline, they also plant the seeds of many character journeys and storylines which are going to blossom as the season plays out. While there are certainly a lot of things that I think could have been cut and tightened up significantly in the script to give more time to the things which I feel needed more development, I still think that the skeleton of the story that these 3 episodes tell is pretty strong. And with perhaps a couple more redrafts, really would have been the super strong start to the season that people were looking for. But with all that said, let's dive straight into episode 1 year later. We pick up in BBY4, 1 year after the end of season 1. So I'm assuming you've watched the show, you know that season 2 is divided up into 4 3-episode arcs, all taking place 1 year after each other. Now the reason that they had to do this is because Lucasfilm decided that Andor was going to not continue after season 2, even though it was originally slated for 5 seasons. And the writers of the show had already had the overarching story in mind for the 5 seasons, and since the creators wanted to tie up the show nicely, they had the daunting task of somehow condensing 4 seasons worth of content into 1. And such, the 4-arc structure is what they went with. And while I do think that it functions mostly, I also think that the 1 year time gaps do hurt the show a little bit. The first episodes of all the arcs after this, episodes 4, 7, 10 is a little different due to the way that the episode plays out and who it's focused on, but 4 and 7 do feel like they're playing a little bit of catch-up to accommodate for the year gap before it can proceed with the story that their respective arcs are trying to tell. Now episode 1 is the first episode of the arc where I feel like the 1 year time gap isn't that much of a hindrance. At the end of season 1, Cassian escaped with Luthen, and had made the step towards truly becoming a rebel that was going to fight against the Empire as his main mission in life. So I think it makes sense for the story to jump a little bit to where Cassian is not only a little bit more experienced as a rebel by this point, but also has established more trust and credibility with Luthen as one of his dependable operatives. I don't think the in-between stuff for both of their characters was critical at this specific point in the timeline, so I'm fine that we've jumped to the point that we are now. We begin at Andor Test Facility 73. Nia, an Imperial crew member, checks up on the TIE Avenger to make sure that it is ready for flying. I do have some thoughts on the TIE Avenger, but I'll save it for a little later when we see it in action. After she completes her work, Nia makes her way to meet Andor, who has snuck himself in as a test pilot for the TIE Avenger. The interaction between these two characters here is really strong. Nia has decided that she's going to defect from the Empire and help the rebellion, but it is not a decision that she makes easily, or even knows if it's right. And this is a gray area which is quite intriguing to me. Most times in other Star Wars stories, defecting from the Empire to the rebellion has always been very black and white, mostly boiling down to, I hate the Empire and now I'm going to fight for the rebellion. Not to say that there's anything wrong with that per se, but the fact that we got to see a much more morally nuanced defection here is something that I found really compelling, as well as pretty fresh. It's made clear that on an individual, more micro level, Nia has actually quite liked working for the Empire. She likes her co-workers, has seemingly been content with her job. She even says that she's been happy here on Shinar, but on a more macro scale, disapproves of how the Empire is run and what they stand for. It's an interesting moral conundrum that she finds herself in. Should she just continue to plow on and keep living her more simple life that she's happy with, even though she doesn't approve of the system that she is a part of? She struggles with whether she is making the right decision, as she emotionally conveys her feelings towards Andor. Andor responds in a way that makes her mixed feelings become much more clear. Sure, she could continue on, live her happy life, and maybe make it out unscathed, but she will never feel right unless she is doing what she can to stop them, because she knows that the system she is a part of is wrong. Her making this decision to defect, to rebel, is simply, as he puts, her coming home to herself. The part of her that was always there. Not only does this characterize her decision to step into the circle of rebellion so effectively, but I also think that it parallels Andor's journey as a character throughout season 1. He was never someone who liked the Empire, but never made the jump into fighting what he knew was wrong, always looking out and thinking about himself first. But eventually, by the end, makes his way to becoming a rebel who may very well die fighting the Empire, after fully experiencing the evil that the Empire was capable of, as well as getting a taste earlier earlier in the season that fighting against them and succeeding was possible. It was simply him acknowledging the part of himself that was always there. So Andor makes his way to the hangar, which is completely empty of people, and enters the TIE Avenger. Upon entering, he notices quickly that the controls are completely different, which would imply that this was completely unexpected. He had no idea that the controls of this TIE prototype were going to be different. The controls are so different, in fact, that he can't even fly it initially, which I think begs the question of why would the Empire create a TIE prototype with controls that are completely different from all their other models? Wouldn't you want all of your trained pilots that are specialized in flying TIE fighters to have an easy time in transitioning to this model? Yes, I know it's a TIE prototype, but this seems kind of illogical to me. I realize that this is most certainly a nitpick, but it's noticeable enough to bring it up. Also, the fact that Cassian seems so surprised by what the inside looks like leads me to believe that going into the mission, he had absolutely no idea exactly what he was going to be stealing, and has gone into this mission effectively blind. Now, Luthen was the one who sent him on this mission, and it seems a little out of character for him to send Andor on such a risky mission where he doesn't have all the details necessary to effectively carry it out. Luthen has been characterized throughout the show as being a very cautious person, very detail-oriented, so him sending Cassian on this mission strikes me more as something Saw would do, not Luthen. But anyways, Cassian crashes the TIE several times into the walls as he's attempting to escape, setting off the alarms, which leads into the big action set piece. I want to love this scene, and I certainly think that it looks fantastic, but there are a couple things that play out which seem a little too goofy for me, and they really stand out in a show like Andor. For one, as the stormtroopers enter, they begin firing upon the TIE. This is fine, it would most certainly be a natural response, but they fire on it for a good while, and it clearly isn't doing any damage. Instead of stopping and trying to switch to more heavy weaponry, they just continue firing upon it like mindless droids. Yes, I know that there is a range trooper on the other side of the room with a rocket launcher, but that doesn't mean that all of the stormtroopers just have to mindlessly shoot for no reason when it clearly is not effective. 2. Why do the stormtroopers just stand out in the open like this? Wouldn't you want to try to find cover behind something to try and avoid the wrath of a rogue TIE that is going to shoot at you? Obviously, they know that TIE fighters have weapons on them, and they've surely deduced by this point that the TIE Avenger has been hijacked by an enemy. So it would logically make sense to find cover when you are on the ground fighting against a starfighter. Clearly, they were too stupid to realize this, because shortly after Cassian gets the weapons working, he blows them all to hell. As Cassian escapes the facility, he still hasn't quite worked out how to fly it, so he slides down to the edge of this cliff. For some reason, the TIE completely shuts down once it reaches the edge of the cliff, and it's not exactly clear why. I'm not saying it isn't possible, there might have been a malfunction or something, but it seems more likely that they conveniently had the power shut off just so the other TIE advances could catch up to him. It feels more like they wanted to have a chase scene, but weren't able to come up with a strong way for it to logically happen, so they had to write this convenience in there. Regardless, however, in the nick of time, Cassian is able to just barely evade the incoming missiles, and a TIE fighter chase ensues. Now, I don't really have anything negative to say about the chase itself, mostly positive. The chase was tense, it looked really visually striking. In fact, it's been years actually, now that I think about it, since we've had a really stunning looking starfighter chase. So good job, VFX artist. The main issue that I have doesn't actually relate to the chase, it more so has to do with the TIE Avenger as a model itself. The TIE Avenger is just way too powerful, at least for a TIE model. Yes, I am well aware that there are many different TIE variants, and more rare models which are superior to the standard TIE fighter. One that comes to mind was Thrawn's TIE Defender program, which was head and shoulders above the standard TIE. But this TIE Avenger even makes the Defender look pretty obsolete. It has double Gatling guns, a really high-powered laser, torpedoes. Its shields are obviously really strong, it's extremely fast and slick. It has a hyperdrive because Cassian was able to fly it to Yavin 4 and Mina Rao, as we'll later see. It's too much. It's too perfect for my liking. There's also the question of, who is this a prototype for? It clearly can't be for the Imperial Navy on a large scale, because if they had the capability of engineering a TIE variant that was this capable, then they would have done it already. Which leads me to believe that this was going to be a super rare TIE variant which couldn't be mass produced. It has to be, or else this really damages the Empire further down the timeline timeline. Because I'd constantly be asking myself, why haven't they mass-produced that extremely powerful TIE for the Navy at large? Because it's not like Cassian stole the design plans for the TIE Avenger, he just stole a model itself. And surely they'd be able to make more. That's assuming, of course, that the TIE Avenger had the capabilities of being mass-produced, which we do not get an answer to. But anyways, Cassian is able to barely, but successfully, escape with the TIE Avenger. And we then cut over to Mina Rao. Bix, Willman, and Brasso have settled and are now living on Mina Rao, a farming planet in the Outer Rim, after they escaped the riot on Ferrix at the end of Season 1. Bix is frighteningly awoken from her sleep by a vision of Dr. Gorst, who you'll all remember was the doctor responsible for torturing her last season, with the really weird method of listening to screaming Disneyite children. And I'm glad that they've decided to carry this plot point over. The way that it was described in the last season made it sound very psychologically traumatizing, and something that you'd never be able to fully recover from. And from this short scene, we are left to infer that Bix has been really struggling with the psychological scarring over the past year since we've seen her. And as we'll later see, this trauma is going to be used over the next 2 story arcs, in particular in Arc 2, to really deepen the emotional connection and aid in developing dynamics of Bix and Cassian's relationship. I also think that it was a wise decision on the writer's part for this to be our first introduction back with Bix. Considering the last time we saw her, she had been rescued by Cassian and visibly was not doing too hot post-torture, so it feels like it carries over very smoothly from season to season. Cut to Chandrilla and the wedding between Mon Mothma's daughter Lita and Skolden's son Stekken, that was first teased back in Season 1, has come to fruition, and the 3-day-long wedding event has begun. We have a very impressive one-take shot here, which beautifully shows off the set they've constructed. I will most likely repeat myself many times throughout this series, so I apologize in advance, but the work that's gone into constructing these real sets is just breathtaking, and really helps in the immersion of every location. This is one of the big criticisms I've had with all the other Disney Plus shows, is the clear over-reliance on the volume stage. It was a neat introduction of technology back in Season 1 of Mando, but I still think that it should be used sparingly, because at the current moment, it still hasn't quite reached the level of realism necessary for it to go unnoticed, especially when it is used all the time. So compared to the real sets that are used for the vast majority of Andor, I don't want to say it's a night and day difference, but it's noticeable enough, and I absolutely commend the filmmakers and the set designers for taking the time and using the budget necessary to convincingly pull something off like this to the scale to which they do. But anyways, back to the plot. Mon makes her way down the steps of her estate slowly towards Luthen, passing by a number of different people on the way. I think it's worth noting that Genevieve's performance here is understated, but it's very effective and perfectly encapsulates the way she described herself back in Season 1. The Mon that people think they know, it's just a front. It's a lie. And you can see her putting on that performance as she's greeting certain people and playing nice. But as soon as her attention goes back to Luthen as she makes her way down the steps, the facade drops immediately, but she can turn it back on at a moment's notice. It's really good stuff on an acting front as well as characterization for Mon. Luthen has arrived at the wedding without Mon knowing he was gonna be here, and oh boy am I excited for this back and forth drama ahead of us. I kinda love how Mon's initial reaction to seeing Luthen is immediately negative. She immediately assumes that something must be wrong or something big is going down. Cause why else would he be here? Sure, he says that he's officially here for Skolden because he's got an artifact for him, but she knows that there's other reasons why he's here. It paints an interesting picture of the dynamic of their relationship. Obviously Mon is working with Luthen, and she wants his help with certain things likewise, but she's also very clearly intimidated by his presence. So the fact that she doesn't fully trust him is an interesting dynamic that gladly the show most definitely plays with. Cut back to Luthen and Clea. Clea informs Luthen that she has received a pulse code that Andor was able to get away from Sinar clean. I wouldn't exactly call that clean, but okay. He got away nonetheless, and Luthen wants more details, but Clea can't give it to him because it was only a pulse code, and she can't transmit. And she can't do a proper transmission because that risks exposure, considering that they're on Chandrilla, which is a planet a part of the Empire. It begs the question as to, if this is such an issue, then why is Clea even here? Now granted, she does leave in a later episode because of this problem, but I think they wrote it this way because they wanted to remind more casual viewers, remember Clea? Yeah, she exists, okay? Just a reminder. So her coming into the story later down the line wouldn't feel odd, like she just all of a sudden spawned in there. But it doesn't get rid of the fact that why she is here is a little clunky from a writing perspective. And the more committed viewers of this show will obviously know who she is later down the line, so I wish the writers put a little more trust in the audience here. I understand that this scene was included to lay the seeds of the tension and worry that surrounds the characters not in Cassian's immediate circle, because they have no idea what has happened to him, but I do wish that this information drop could have played out a little differently. Anyways, back on Mina Rao, Bix and Willman go about some of their daily tasks, giving us a little bit of insight as to what their new lives are looking like. They are interrupted by Bila, who's got the hots for Willman. Come on, Willman. Pull it together, man. You got it, bro. But before Willman is unable to unleash his Riz, they are interrupted by the arrival of the Empire, which is described as being very out of the ordinary for this Outer Rim system. And I think the fact that I was genuinely concerned for our characters about the arrival of an Imperial transport ship of all things, just goes to show how good of a job the show did back in Season 1 of portraying the Empire as a genuine threat. Something you should be scared of when their presence arrives, because you know full well that they are a vast-reaching, fully competent, and evil machine that will stop at nothing to achieve their goals and maintain control. This is how the Empire should have always been portrayed, and I think that Andor does a better job than any other on-screen Star Wars project in this department. Even better than the OT in my opinion. Cut back to Andor, and he has arrived with the TIE Avenger on a mysterious forest planet that won't be named yet to meet someone named Porco. As he makes his way out, something is clearly not right because Porco isn't responding. A voice yells out from behind the trees that 15 blasters surround him and to get on the ground. But another voice yells out angrily at this voice pissed off, and they have a back and forth exchange of words. I wasn't the biggest fan of the dialogue here. Yes, I know it's establishing the tense dynamic between all these rebels for the next time we return here, but it's a little goofy. I wish it was written and acted out a little differently. Andor gets on the ground, puts his hand up, and the rebels begin to surround him before the show cuts away. So there's not a whole lot to unpack here. It's really just a quick scene to give us an update on Andor's status, as well as kick off the confrontation, which Andor will be a part of for the next couple of episodes. The next scene, however, is pretty juicy. Cut to the Malthine Divide. A number of high-ranking Imperials have gathered in a secret conference room to discuss the Empire's secret agenda for the planet of Gorman. At the head of the table is none other than Director Krennic, and I am so glad that he is back. There is so much more expanding upon his character that I wanted to see after Rogue One. It also feels like a natural inclusion, not something that was just forced in here. Considering that we are starting to edge closer to the events of Rogue One, it's made very clear by Krennic that absolutely no one outside of this room is to know about what happened here. Ben Mendelsohn's performance here is fierce and extremely intimidating, and it's incredible just how effortlessly he has stepped back into this role. So good job, Ben. Krennic makes it very clear as to just how classified this is, saying that even the highest of Imperial officers don't know about this. Well, considering who Krennic is, and considering that we are just 4 years away now from Rogue One, I have a feeling I know where this is going. There's also a very small smile as he's saying that line, because clearly he enjoys the fact that some of his Imperial rivals don't get to know this classified information. Alright, that's a great way to hook in your audience. Tell me more, Krennic. But instead of continuing to talk, a screen rolls down and a video presentation begins to play. After a super happy and upbeat infomercial about Gorman and the Gorman Twill, Krennic pauses the video and with a sly smile simply says, "Gorman is of great interest to the Empire." And it cuts away. Now this is how you execute a cliffhanger. Give us just enough information where we kind of understand what's going on, but need more information to get a full picture of what exactly the endgame is here. It gives us a reason to want to come back here. It's a very effective scene. So take notes, Rings of Power.
Are you talking back sass to me?
Cut back to the forest planet. I think I'll mention it now because it's going to start to become very apparent throughout the next 12 to 13 minutes, but the show is going to keep cutting back between here and Malthine, and I don't really know why, at least to the extent that it does. I'm fine with it maybe intercutting once or twice, maybe 3 times, but every time it feels like we're starting to get comfortable in the new setting, the show decides to cut away, and it was kind of annoying. You also notice pretty quickly the more this goes on, every time we cut back to Malthine, there's new information being presented which is critical to moving the plot forward. But every time we cut back to here, not a whole lot new is happening. It pretty much boils down to, they argue with each other, cut away, cut back, and they're still arguing with each other, cut away again, cut back again, they're still arguing with each other. You get the point. It could have been trimmed down heavily. This is going to start to become very apparent in episode 2, but I thought I'd mention it now so we all have that idea in our heads. Andor tries to figure out what the hell is going on and prove to these random rebels that he's not an Imperial pilot, but they aren't going for it. They think he's lying. They are arguing intensely between themselves about how exactly to go about extracting information from Andor, and arguing about the validity of what he is saying. I clearly see what they're going for here. The very disorganized rebels juxtaposed against the very organized Empire. That's likely the reason why they're constantly cutting between here and Malthine. It is very apparent that that is the point they're trying to get across, and I'm fine with this depiction of the rebels in Thesis. In fact, it makes a whole lot of sense at this point in the timeline that the rebels still haven't really gotten their act together. They don't have a clear hierarchical structure or system of operation. They haven't combined yet into one big rebel entity like we see in the original trilogy. They are all just a bunch of small factions and groups spread throughout the galaxy, chewing off the little bits that they can of the Empire's grasp over the galaxy. The problem is, there's nothing really more beyond that. After the first 2 to 3 minutes with them, I've already gotten the point, but where's the substance? Why does this section need to go on for as long as it does? It doesn't really develop the rebels as characters beyond that basic thesis, and it certainly doesn't develop Andor to any meaningful extent. Again though, I think this problem becomes more apparent the more the plot branch drags on. It isn't a huge problem yet since we've all just met these people, but every time we return here from now on, it progressively gets less and less interesting, because there is very little that the show is trying to tell beyond that basic thesis. Anyways, cutting back to Malthine. Krennic explains that the reason the Empire is interested in Gorman is due to the large amount of substrate foliated calcite, a mineral that is essential to completing the Emperor's plan for energy independence. By energy independence, Krennic means giant ball of death, but the others don't know that. After Krennic drops little clues in the words that he chooses to use, it becomes clear to us audience members that they need this mineral for the completion of the Death Star. This mineral is seemingly the only thing in the galaxy that they are aware of that can properly coat the reactor lens needed for the Death Star. Alright, I'm super interested now. Go on. Krennic explains that if they are unable to find a calcite alternative, they will have to take control of the planet and silence any resistance, which translates to commit genocide. So in just a few short minutes, the writers have successfully given us a full grasp on what the major conflict of the season is going to be in Arcs 2 and 3. It could have stopped here, and we would have had pretty much all the information we need, but we get even more when we cut back here in a few minutes. It's mostly character developing exchanges, but I will say that I think it helps enhance our understanding of the mindsets of all the people and pieces at play for what's to come. Cut back to the Forest Planet. The rebels try to figure out how to fly the TIE Avenger. Cassian isn't able to provide much insight because he is in handcuffs and barely understands the mechanics himself. So the rebels continue to argue and yell, and pretty much this just reinforces what I was saying earlier. They are the disorganized rebels contrasted with the organized Empire. There isn't much more to this brief scene beyond that. Are you starting to see what I'm saying? Quickly, we cut back to Malthine. Partagaz asks whether the calcite extraction will be an invasive process, and Krennic acknowledges that the extraction of calcite will likely lead to total collapse of the planet. Partagaz and another Imperial officer seem to be taken aback by this, and question whether this plan is even a possibility, considering that Gorman has been established as a planet with significant Imperial power within the Senate. So, Krennic reiterates the fact that that is exactly why they have to plan carefully, or else everything has the potential to blow up in their face. Krennic in this scene is the embodiment of the higher Imperial authorities as a whole. The Empire is willing to stop at nothing to extract the things that they need in order to see that their plans come to fruition, even if that means sacrificing an entire Imperial planet. It makes complete sense that they'd be willing to commit these atrocities, and even helps foreshadow how the Empire will blow up Alderaan 4 years down the line, despite it being a planet within the Imperial government, just to make a point. It also makes complete sense as to why Krennic is stressing that this potential genocide has to be very thorough and well planned out, because they don't have the Death Star yet. The ultimate means of fuck you power. We're going to do whatever we want. In episode 4, they have the Death Star, so they don't have to be discreet about their genocide of Alderaan. They can do whatever they want. But here, they don't have the Death Star yet. So I appreciate the show acknowledging that at this point in the timeline, they aren't just able to do anything, like blow up a planet, that wouldn't result in some type of pushback or fight against them, outside of the Empire or, more notably, within the Empire itself. Cut back to the Forest Planet, and the rebels continue to argue about how they can possibly leave the planet, and whether or not their own pilot has the capabilities of flying the TIE Avenger, and whether or not they should use Andor to teach her how to fly it. It has been established at this point that the leader of these ragtag group of rebels was killed prior to their introduction, and so there is a power vacuum, and we are now starting to get the sense that two factions are starting to emerge. One led by Gertis, the other led by Barty, who fundamentally disagree about what they should do. I also think that it's worth highlighting the contrast in these two scenes doesn't just boil down to showing that the Empire is competent and the rebellion is kind of a mess at this point. There's also the point of these rebels are arguing about things which, in the grand scale of their larger objective, is pretty pointless shit, while the Empire is currently having one of the most important conversations in the galaxy's history: how they're going to extract this mineral so that they can complete the ultimate power in the universe. So again, I'll reiterate that I can see why they did this on an editing front, but it is a little jarring when you are constantly cutting between locations every single minute. While I love the Empire stuff in this section, the Rebel stuff is a little weak. I wish they weren't depicted as being so retarded and acting like children. It makes it hard to believe that these people could execute any sort of meaningful offensive against the Empire. Anyways, off to the side, Andor is being intently watched by one of the rebel soldiers. Andor is able to extract information from this rebel guy pretty cleverly. He knows that they are hungry, have been stranded for at least 2 days since he left from this spot for his mission to Shinar 3 days ago. And he's able to appeal to those desires, cause this guy really just wants to get the fuck out of here, even if he's not supposed to reveal anything to Cassian. I think it's neat that the show once again has reiterated the fact that yes, Cassian is a rebel, he is a good guy, but he's not afraid to get his hands a little dirty in the pursuit of helping himself, as well as the greater good. There are certain lines that he is willing to cross to accomplish those things. In this case, it's manipulating and lying, because in the very next scene, he outs this guy to the rest of the rebels that he was the one who told him that they were part of the Maya Pei Brigade. Back in Malthine, we get insight into how the Empire plans to carry out their grand plan, detailing that they plan to implement very intricately structured and well thought out propaganda in order to weaponize the galactic opinion against the Empire. They are going to do this before they start the mining process, so when they eventually start, there will be less resistance to it. And Krennic loves this, quite comedically I might add. Krennic lets these two from the Ministry of Enlightenment, quite an ironic name by the way, lay out the plan which they are going to implement to the galactic public. I found it slightly comedic while at the same time pretty creepy how these two enjoy doing their evil job so much. And they're going to sell the galaxy on the idea that, no, Gorman isn't actually a good place. They're actually extremely arrogant people. They're having so much fun pitching their ideas, while at the same time, their strategies being extremely evil. So, a little unsettling, but good stuff nonetheless. Back on the Forest Planet, one of the rebels teases the idea that there are beasts out in the forest. This will be important later, and the rest of the rebels and the TIE Avenger continue to scream and argue with each other. Nothing new here. There is one important issue though that I need to highlight which is starting to become more and more apparent, and is definitely a narrative inconsistency based on what the earlier scenes established. So the big problem that the rebels are facing is that their pilot lady doesn't know how to fly the TIE Avenger. But why does that mean she is unable to figure it out? Early in the episode, the piloting system was completely foreign to Cassian as well. But Cassian, being the pilot that he is, was able to figure it out after a couple of minutes. Or at least well enough to where he was able to escape. And she's a pilot too, just like Cassian. Sure, maybe she isn't as good of a pilot and it might take a little longer for her to figure everything out, but she should be able to figure it out nonetheless. Back on Malthine, the session has seemingly concluded and the Imperials converse in small groups around the conference room, eating treats and sipping drinks while discussing amongst themselves how to best genocide the Gorman people. Krennic walks over to Dedra, and it's revealed that she is here at his personal request. Krennic seems to take an interest in Dedra for her ruthless determination despite her past failings. He asks for her assessment on the matters, seeming genuinely interested to see what she has to say. This is an interesting bit of character development for Krennic, because Krennic, at least of what we saw of him in Rogue One, was very self-centered. He wanted to do everything himself, or at least take the credit for it. Now that might be what he's doing here, getting information out of Dedra, then we'll pass it off as his own later down the line. But regardless, I do find it interesting that Krennic is interested in the opinions of a lower ranked officer like Dedra, instead of being too arrogant or prideful to ask. Dedra tells Krennic that she believes his plan is incomplete. that propaganda won't be enough. In addition to that, they need people, in particular, Gorman rebels, that they can count on to do the wrong thing. Dedra walks off, and Krennic slowly gives an evil smile. Oh, buddy, I can't wait to see where this goes. And this ends the Krennic/ISB plot for the episode. As I was watching all these small scenes unfold, I was deeply reminded of a great film that I had watched a while ago, but was struggling to remember the name of. So I did a bit of digging, and remember that the movie was called Conspiracy from 2001. That film depicts the secret meeting in early 1942 where many high-ranking Nazi officials met to determine how they were going to best implement the final solution to the quote-unquote Jewish question. It's a phenomenal film. I recommend you check it out. And these scenes struck me as extremely similar to that film. A bunch of high-ranking Imperial officers meeting at a remote location for a super classified meeting, casually discussing how to best genocide an entire planet of people. It's really well-written drama, and so efficiently constructs what will be the centerpiece of the upcoming episodes, as well as give us a deep understanding of the current status of the Empire's reach and limitations over the galaxy. Back on Mina Rao, Brasso has returned to inform the group that he has learned that the Imperials have come to initiate a supply census. They want to know where their materials are coming from, and more specifically, who is supplying them. This presents obvious challenges, since Brasso, Bix, and Willman are here illegally. However, I think more could have been done here. I do wish we would have gotten a little more character development out of this section. Like, how do they truly feel about all this? Yeah, we know they recognize that the Empire is a problem, but are they scared? Are they confident in their abilities to avoid them? Are they unsure of how much they should be worried? Do they regret coming here? The show could have expanded on their personal feelings towards the matter a little more, but instead it cuts away. That is probably my biggest problem I have with the Mina Rao section. There isn't much deeper beneath the surface. It's mostly just surface level plot unfolding. This starts to become more apparent the more time goes by, but I thought it right to mention now, so I can refer back to this when the problem inevitably rises again. Cut back to Chandrila. We get a number of brief looks into conversations, but nothing is super important until we get to the part with Mon and Tay. However, before that, I thought I'd briefly mention this small moment here with Luthen. It was kind of funny because it highlights that even when he's not on quote-unquote duty, so to speak, he's still doing all that he can to extract information. He hears that this boy is stationed on Steer Guard, so he very intently asks where everyone there is going, in a very Luthen Rail persona type of delivery. It's a nice little bit of character work there, so it's definitely worth highlighting. So Mon approaches Tay because she promised to speak with him earlier on, but Tay is noticeably a little on edge, immediately starting with, "You've been avoiding me," with a small bit of hostility in his voice. This is quite unusual compared to how he was characterized back in Season 1, I might add. You can just tell by his gestures and the way that he's delivering his lines that something's off, and Mon can sense it too. However, they are interrupted by Skolden's wife, and Mon is pulled away to deal with another issue, which just further angers Tay, although he doesn't want to show it. So we'll put this on ice and move on until we get more information to work with. So Mon approaches Lita, who has run away from the party. She is upset that Stekken won't hold her hand and seemingly won't show romantic interest in her, and is upset with the situation. Not in the sense that she's upset with getting married in this fashion, because she was characterized back in Season 1 of feeling a deep sense of pride for Chandrilan traditions, more so that this is the man that has been chosen for her to marry. Mon simply says that she's sorry, but there's a double meaning to what she's saying, and Lita doesn't even realize it. Yes, she's sorry about the whole Stekken thing, but more so sorry that this is all even happening. She effectively sold off her daughter in order to secure financial support for the rebellion. She sacrificed her family for the greater good of the galaxy, and you can see the heartache in her face. To round off episode 1, we cut back to the forest planet. The retarded rebels continue to argue similar to how they've been doing the entire episode. Gertis tries to claim to the group that he is obviously the one to lead the group now, since he was always Maya's number 2. But half of them disagree, and it gets heated to the point where they pull blasters on each other, and shoot at each other, surprisingly. They split off into 2 groups, Andor is taken by one of the groups like a rag doll, and that is where episode 1 ends. Episode 1 is certainly a mixed bag of an episode. It tips in favor of good and has more good things going for it than bad. However, the things I was not too fond of are certainly noticeable and began to pile up the more the episode goes on. This was a fine start to the season, but certainly not as strong of a start when compared to Season 1. The overall competence of the writing and efficiency of the scripts for the opening episodes of Season 1 and 2 have noticeable gaps in quality. When taking a step back and having a vague look at Season 2, Episode 1, overall, the opening sequence was mostly strong, though a few instances of goofiness which I was not too fond of. The Chandrila plotline I also think was pretty good. There are a couple things I'd tighten up, and admittedly, not a whole lot happens from a plot perspective in this episode, but it competently sets in motion elements which will begin to pay off in episodes 2 and 3. The Andor plotline with the rebels was very redundant and kind of annoying, and doesn't really have much to offer other than the thesis statement that it's trying to convey about the rebellion as an entity at the current moment. It could have used all that time to further progress Cassian's journey as a character in a meaningful way, but instead we have to listen to this gang of idiots yell at each other for an entire episode. The Mina Rao plotline gets the least amount of time in the episode, so I'll be the least critical of it. There are some interesting elements that are introduced and are now at play to be expanded upon in the upcoming 2 episodes. However, it mostly boils down to surface level plot, and doesn't go much deeper beyond that besides a little bit of introduced character struggles for Bix. The Imperial plotline, on the other hand, is just brilliant. Not only is it efficient with the time that it is given, it has good character development for Krennic, and nails the tone that it's going for, as well as give us a much better understanding of the Empire's current objective, as well as the challenges they'll face in order to achieve that objective. Episode 1 I'm going to give a 6 out of 10, which on my grading scale is above average. Here is my grading scale for reference. And no, I don't do any of this 7 out of 10 is average crap like the American school system. Average should be middle of the road, which for me is a 5 out of 10. I'm not sure yet if episode 1 is going to have the lowest score, but it's going to start to trend up from here. And with that does it for my thoughts on episode 1. If you've made it all the way here to the end of the video, then you, my friend, are certainly a true Andor fan. I will give you that. If you liked the video, then do me a favor by considering leaving a like and hitting that subscribe button. It would be greatly appreciated. And as always, thank you for taking the time to listen to my thoughts. Also, feel free to take to the comments below and let me know your thoughts on episode 1. Do you think it was good, bad, somewhere in between? Overhated, perhaps? I'll be interested to hear what you guys have to say. But anyways, that's going to do it for today. Stay tuned for my video on episode 2. But until then, I will see you guys in the next one.